Well, that's the kind of response we want to Judgment Day. Forget your troubles, get happy. Get ready for Judgment Day. That's usually not the kind of emotion that accompanies any imagination of what Judgment Day is going to be like. This was kind of peppy and upbeat, whereas usually with judgment we have, weeping and gnashing of teeth. We have fear and trembling. But how could we ever consider Judgment Day to be good news in any sense? Now, this is obviously a modern song. Who was it that sang that?
Judy Garland.
Judy Garland, and Ella Fitzgerald sang a version. There's several others that sang this song in various ways. But it's a modern song, but it looks back to the way that slaves would have looked at Judgment Day. Slaves, they were interested in those Bible passages that about God's judgment as putting things right. Righting wrongs, freeing slaves, lifting up the downtrodden, rescuing sinners from ruined lives. Judgment was about restoration. It wasn't just about punishing. So, judgment as restoring life, as making life whole and harmonious again, as justice, a just life where people can thrive, where they can become who God made them to be. Of course, there are many other images of divine justice in the Bible, of judgment. There's a lot of anger and wrath, fire and brimstone, and there ain't nobody getting happy in those scenes. Pretty bad. Judgment is often portrayed as eternal destruction, endless torment. Judgment in those passages is payback. Reminds me of the title of the Schwarzenegger movie, Terminator 2, Judgment Day. And when Arnold Schwarzenegger says, "I'll be back," it's serious. And there's going to be a lot of destruction, a lot of bullets flying, that kind of thing. So, judgment in these cases is infinite payback. It's not payback necessarily in proportion to the crime, it's payback with interest, compound interest, eternally compounding, unending payback. So, this does kind of make me wonder, are these different images of judgment, are they compatible? Are they compatible with the God that is revealed in Jesus Christ? Are they compatible with any concept of God that we should be worshiping? Now, one thing that we need to remember that we so easily forget, especially when you get those amazingly, technicolor, vivid images of divine judgment in the book of Revelation that the movies can capture so well now. Those images are so vivid that we tend to see them as literal. And that's where we need to be careful. Especially any image, any idea, any attribute that you put next to God is automatically going to be transformed and changed. Because the infinite and holy and loving God does not love in the sentimental way that we love, is not angry in the way that we throw fits and get all ticked off. God is angry, God is loving in ways that are far beyond the human concepts of those things. So we need to ask ourselves, if God punishes in some sense that is worthy of the nature of God, then what is God's purpose? Why would God punish? Is the purpose ultimately to correct the sinner, to make them right again, to get them to repent and turn their life around? Or if they haven't turned their life around, if they've wasted their 70-some years on this earth, living a frivolous life, then does that mean that they're going to experience infinite, unending torture for infinity, for eternity, forever and ever? The Bible uses a lot of very threatening and extreme language. The prophets are trying to get people scared straight. But how should we literally take that? As 21st century people, how should we understand that? Is God literally a God of unending, punishing payback forever and ever and ever? Or is God's punishment more like an intervention? painful as it is. It's based in love. It forces us to face painful, difficult truths that may burn and torment us in some way until we start to come to terms with it. But all that pain and torment is only for the purpose of getting us to change and be restored. How does God judge? How does God judge? Well, the next part of the Apostles' Creed that we're looking at today can be seen as offering us two types of judgment. The payback kind and the kind that is about setting things right. So this part of the creed says, I believe in Jesus Christ, who suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended to the dead. On the third day he rose again, ascended to heaven, is seated at the right hand of the Father, and will come again to judge the living and the dead. So Pilate's payback kind of justice crucifies Jesus for disturbing the peace and not knuckling under to the local authorities. Pilate makes an example of Jesus in ways that correspond to our justice system at times, shaming him, imposing suffering on him, and then at the end imposing the death penalty. For the Romans, there's no point in trying to redeem or reform people. It's simply a matter of punishing Jesus because he got out of line. God's judgment, on the other hand, has to be different. And you see this kind of movement in the creed where Jesus is crucified, descends to the dead, and then is raised up, and then is seated at the right hand of the Father. That's God's judgment on Jesus, vindicating Jesus' whole life work, his whole ministry, his way of doing things. God raises Jesus from the dead and enthrones him over all the world. And that's just another way of saying that Jesus is the way God rules and judges and sets things right. Jesus is the way that happens. Not Pilate's way of shaming and torturing, destroying, executing. That's not God's way. So it's the same Jesus, the Jesus who healed and forgave and embraced sinners in order to change and transform their lives. That's the Jesus that God sends to judge and to set things right. Of course, you and I, we're willing to take all the healing and forgiving and loving we can get from God. It's really the others we're worried about. The ones who refuse to get their act together. They soak up the grace and forgiveness, and they don't change. So what about them? Well, of course, we feel obligated to try to turn them around. We try to light a fire under them, so to speak. If only we could get them to feel ashamed enough or scared enough, maybe they would change. Maybe that's the motivational key. But have you ever noticed how hard it is to use good judgment when it comes to expressing our judgment of other people? Things just fly out of our mouths and we wish we could grab and pull back, but it's too late. We've hurt someone, we've wounded them, and now we don't want to listen to all of our good advice about how their lives could be better. And why do we do that? We do that because somebody else did it to us. We were wounded by that, and now we feel like we've regained a certain amount of control over the world if we, impart our wisdom, our criticisms to others. It's hard to do that in a loving and constructive way. And when we don't do that, it's like eternal payback. It just keeps going. We keep saying things and doing things, offer criticisms and judgments that don't heal, but in fact turn people more against us. The therapist Wayne Muller says, the greatest barrier to our healing is not the pain, sorrow, or violence inflicted on us as children. Our greatest hindrance is our ongoing capacity to judge, to criticize, and to bring tremendous harm on ourselves and others. If we can harden our hearts against ourselves and meet our most tender feelings with anger and condemnation, what that does is it armors our hearts against the possibility of gentleness, love, and healing. Muller says, we judge ourselves in the hope that we would be more perfect and acceptable to our parents, our God, to ourselves. We also learn to judge ourselves as a tool of self-defense. If we could only root out our defects before our parents discovered them, perhaps they would be less angry and disappointed with us. We harshly criticize ourselves first to prevent others from judging us even more harshly. I don't know about you, but I see a bit of myself in that. I've gone through that cycle of thinking. And when I'm in that mode of thinking, it doesn't really energize me or motivate me to change. In fact, the more I dwell in that, the more powerless and worthless I feel. So when a God or a parent or a critic wants to swoop down and tell me about all of my faults and how miserable I am, it doesn't seem to be very effective to lead me into repentance. I tend to withdraw from it. I feel overwhelmed. I feel unworthy. And I avoid the whole issue because it just seems too much. I can't deal with it. So what I need something that empowers me to change. I don't need the harsh, attacking criticism. Now, in Deuteronomy 11, you saw a particular mode of behavior and motivation here. Marge read that. It basically boils down to, if you follow the commandments, God will cause the sun to shine and the rain to water your crops. And if you're not good, then no rain, no harvest, no food. And you may have noticed the very ironic juxtaposition of that to Matthew chapter 5. Turns that model upside down. Jesus has God sending the rain and the sun on the righteous and the unrighteous, on the good and the evil. The God that Jesus reveals here does not repay evil for evil and good for good. We see that throughout the way Jesus preaches, and he preaches directly on the nature of God the Father. That God the Father does not retaliate. God blesses evildoers, and then Jesus says, we should do the same. God is complete in his love in that way, and so we should be complete in our love in that way. Now, why is that? Is Jesus soft on sin? No. But Jesus knows that we have to soften our hearts if we're ever going to start turning towards him. Crusty old hearts need some life-giving sun and rain if anything's going to sprout. There's something in us that keeps us, that armors us. We're armored, like Muller was saying. That armors us from being receptive to change, being receptive to a new truth. So what Jesus does throughout his ministry, you see this. People need to receive love. They need to see love modeled for them before they can learn to be loving and respectful of people and of themselves. You cannot constructively engage your own sins and mistakes unless you first feel that you are more than your flaws. And you will feel that way and act that way because someone is first loving you, accepting you, and respecting you without your having to earn it first. Muller says, the more we meet ourselves with love instead of with violence and of judgment, the more available and open we are to being seen, being known, and being intimately cared for by ourselves and others. We need to learn to see ourselves and others with soft eyes, not with eyes that distort or deny, but with eyes that attend more gently to the full spectrum of what is true about us. And that includes our goodness and our worthiness. I like that, soft eyes. I think that is a good way of saying what it means to exercise good judgment, Christ-like judgment, and how we begin to evaluate what I see in Jesus Christ. I do not see any reason for us to fear the last judgment because Jesus is the judge. Jesus is the judge that sets things right by loving us into the light and restoring us to to a life of wholeness and harmony. It isn't a way of getting us to avoid our sin, but it's perhaps the only way that we can constructively confront our sins, our flaws, our problems in a way that can turn our lives around. So let's start exercising good judgment and meet ourselves and our others with grace and forgiveness. And let's start seeing ourselves and our neighbors with soft eyes of compassion. Because that is the way of Jesus Christ. Christ the judge. Christ the one who loves us just the way that we are, so that we can become more and more like him. Amen.
Amen.